All right, well, hello everyone. Welcome back to the Pacific War channel, where we cover the entire history of the Asia-Pacific War from 1937 all the way up to 1945 and all the major events that led up to it. Joined here by fellow YouTuber, Scott. How's it going?
Good, very good. Thank you very much for having me on tonight. I totally appreciate it. It's a great honor.
It's not a problem. And of course, this episode is timely as we're coming up to Pearl Harbor. I thought, who better to go to than yourself? Actually, why don't we start off by you just telling us a little bit about your YouTube channel and your background?
Well, my name is Scott Freund. My YouTube channel is SFR Productions, and I'm kind of an amateur historian, documentary filmmaker, and I got my start doing documentaries about Pearl Harbor. My first was Pearl Harbor, the Real Story, and it turned out quite well. It actually was sold by the National Park Service bookstore there at the Arizona Memorial starting in 2000, and it's been sold there up until probably about 2020, and when they kind of went away from DVD sales. With that study of Pearl Harbor, I've extended into other areas of the Pacific and into Europe. So being an amateur historian, I just love to travel and then document what I see and the history about what was there. So that's kind of what I do as my hobby, is sharing my love of history with people.
Awesome. And stating all of that, there is a lot to know about Pearl Harbor, and there's especially a lot that goes unsaid. And that was, I kind of think, the inspiration for the subsections that we chose for this episode. I wanted to find things that people don't know so much about, the lesser known facts about Pearl Harbor. And this is going to be broken down into 5 videos, and then there will be a full podcast, most likely on Podbean, and perhaps on the YouTube channel, and perhaps also on the Kings and Generals channel. But stating that to the audience, I'll just let you know the 5 sections that we're going to cover today. The first one is the story of Takeo Yoshikawa. The second one will be the Midget Submarine Attacks in Pearl Harbor. The third one will be the military facilities that were hit prior to the ships, and afterwards with the second wave, of course. The fourth one, the extent of the damage to the ships, the significance of what really happened at Pearl Harbor, and what wasn't hit, for that matter. The fifth one, the Arizona footage story that's going to be brought by Scott. And the last one is kind of a silly add-on. The sixth one is going to be a silly conspiracy theory, one in particular that's known as the backdoor theory, which anyone who is a Pearl Harbor enthusiast has definitely heard about this one and all the various aspects of it. We're going into, I would say, one of the least known facts about Pearl Harbor that is actually quite exciting and interesting, the Midget Submarine Attacks that were kind of slapped on at the end of the plans. The IGN didn't want to actually do this. They thought it was going to give away the surprise element to the whole attack, and arguably it should have. There's many opportunities the United States could have took here to actually realize what was going on. But to explain to the audience, what is a midget submarine? So Japan, unlike all the other nations of World War II, decided to make their fleet submarines extremely large, extravagantly large, and some of them were capable of holding what we call midget submarines. Japan sent 5 submarines for the Pearl Harbor attack, the I-16, 18, 20, 22, and the 24, and each was carrying a Type A midget submarine, although I think one of the subs wasn't a Type A, if I'm not mistaken. And they had left Kure Naval District November the 25th to make an attack on Pearl Harbor. And on the 6th of December, the submarines came about 20 kilometers, don't know what that is in miles because I'm a Canadian, at the mouth of Pearl Harbor, and they launched the midget submarines that were going to try and sneak into the harbor, which would have been quite a feat because it's not easy, and there was an anti-submarine net. And if anyone has seen the Kings and Generals video on the attack on Darwin using midget submarines, I ended up writing that. It's actually a very similar situation. Now, I'm going to admit the documentation on which sub did what is actually a bit confusing, and not everybody is 100% sure on exactly what happened. But as far as my research has shown me, at around 1242, the I-16 launched the M16, and even the names of the midget subs will be very confusing because they change depending on if the Japanese are talking about, the Americans are talking about them. And this was the first midget sub to go in. This is followed at 1:16. The I-22 launches the HA-15. At 2:15, the I-18 launches the HA-17. Around 3 o'clock, the I-20 launches the HA-18. And then last, at around 3:30 a.m., the I-24 launches the HA-19. All these subs had to go through the harbor entrance, which would have been about 65 feet deep, and it was guarded by an anti-submarine net that was about 35 feet deep. And in my research, I believe I read part of the operation, two of the subs are going to have to actually move the net a bit so that the other subs could go through, which seems like a very odd maneuver. I don't know how they would have managed that. But actually, I'll leave it to you, Scott. I think you know a little bit about the very beginning of this involving the USS Condor.
Yeah, so again, the Japanese really didn't want these mini subs because they thought it would give it away. When you have more moving parts to an event, one of those cogs could cause an issue. And very early in the morning, the USS Condor, which was a tug, the Condor was outside the entrance of Pearl Harbor. It spotted something. Now, it was not uncommon in the weeks prior. They everybody was reporting something. They were seeing something out in the water. Sometimes it was whales or whatever. So there was already people were noticing something. But the Condor saw something. They believed it was a conning tower. They signaled the Ward. The Ward was the on-duty destroyer that night. The Ward came over to investigate what the Condor had seen, but they didn't find anything. They searched the area over and over again, didn't find anything. Everybody went back to standard operating until the Antares. So the Antares had taken supplies out and they were pulling back a barge. And so the Antares was waiting to get into the harbor with this barge. It was actually waiting for a tug to come out and get the barge. I think the tug was the kō-hyōteki-class. So while it was waiting, the on-duty signalman was Till Chapari, A.E. Chapari. I've actually talked with him about this. He was out watching where the barge was, and he noticed something was out there. And so he called out the officer, and the officer said, "Oh, a buoy had broken loose. You need to call in the number of the buoy so it can be reattached." So Chapari looks through the binoculars and he says, "Sir, that is not a buoy. That is a little conning tower. It looks like a submarine." And so the officer's like, "No, it's got to be a buoy. There's no way there's a submarine that close to the entrance of Pearl Harbor."
Yeah, we might add
Goes,
to the audience, I don't think the United States had any awareness of midget submarine technology. They hadn't been developing anything.
yes, exactly. And so this was so miniature, they didn't know what it was. But Chapari was saying, "No, that is a submarine conning tower." So he got on the signal light and he actually signaled the Ward by light to let them know there is a strange object that's following us towards the entrance of Pearl Harbor. And when you listen to tell the story, Chapari, A.E. Chapari, tell the story, he said he saw the Ward off in the distance and that bow came up out of the water and that ship came full go right at this little mini sub. And he saw them fire on it, drop depth charges, and we all know the story about the Ward saying, "Yeah, we hit it right in the conning tower, and it disappeared." They dropped depth charges. Also, there was a PBY that was out on patrol, and it was
Yeah,
dropping smoke pots, and I think a couple depth charges also, but I think mainly smoke pots to mark the area for where it actually went down. Because once it started to sink, obviously from the surface you're not going to see it, but from their vantage point, they could possibly get a little bit of a shadow or whatever. So they're dropping smoke pots. They continue to look for it. It never resurfaces. Obviously, it's been sunk. And then basically, Chapari tells the officer, "Hey, look, I'm going to signal by light Pearl Harbor, the entrance, and tell them that we have just sunk a submarine." And the officer said, "No, we weren't involved with it. The Ward will." So the Ward then does radio back in and say that we've engaged a submarine. Of course, you know what happens with that. It's going up the chain slowly, and
yeah.
information is not passed in great detail. And the rest is history with what ends up happening.
It's actually interesting. It's part of just, I would call it a strange amount of events that all collide like dominoes, where there was so many
Yes.
signals. The radar operators during Pearl Harbor, the fact that there was people having breakfast, the guy didn't take them seriously. Oh, it's B-17s coming in at the time, and there was
Yes.
so many indicators of what was going on, and then everything just kept falling and falling and falling. Yeah,
Yep.
and
It is amazing.
historians believe, I don't know if this was a confirmed one, this was the HA-18 that got sunk at this particular event. And then the next one up would be the HA-19, which does get through the harbor entrance apparently, but it's unable to get there until the airstrikes actually commence. So this is going to be happening after 7 a.m. in the morning, and it runs aground on a reef, and it kind of gets damaged. Its gyro compass malfunctions. It actually exposes itself because its periscope goes out over the water, and it's the USS Helm that apparently sees it, opens fire on it, misses, and the Ha-19's lower torpedo tube, net gear cutter, and vertical rudder are damaged. I don't know if it's the first time it hits the reef because it hits the reef again, trying in the scramble to get away. Ends up slipping off the reef. Its battery malfunctions or breaks, so the chlorine gas gets into the sub and it knocks out the crew. And we have Ensign Kazuo Sakamaki, who loses consciousness. He regains consciousness, tries to get the sub out again. Apparently, they're depth charged, although I'm not sure if this is confirmed. And he tries to get the submarine to get back to his mother submarine, which would have been the I-24, but he hits a reef again. He then tries to scuttle it. That fails, and he abandons the sub by swimming ashore, and his crewmate ends up drowning and dying. I think the crewmate also tried to make the swim and drowned. I don't think he died in the sub. I don't really remember that. Kiyoshi Inagaki. But Sakamaki ends up becoming the first Japanese POW of the Pacific War.
Yes, and when he gets knocked out, the currents actually take the sub. If you can believe
Yeah.
this, it goes from the entrance of Pearl Harbor all the way around Waikiki, around Diamond Head, and it ends up on the opposite side at Bellows Field. So right near Bellows Field is where it gets beached on a reef out there. Um, the next day they're running these patrols, and here's Sakamaki's laying on the beach. His partner on the sub died in the surf, and they recovered his body. But they
Oh,
brought a tractor out. They brought a tractor out, chained up the submarine, pulled it on shore. And again, what they did is it was the Navy needed to know what in the world is this thing. It went through a full review and investigation to see what the Japanese had done. Uh, the incredible thing about that submarine is it still survives to this day. It's in Fredericksburg, Texas, at the National Museum of the Pacific War. So that part of the Pearl Harbor attack is you can go see and
yeah.
touch, feel, and see exactly how small this little thing is. I mean, it's pretty big, but it's not the standard submarine. But you can go to Fredericksburg, Texas, National Museum of the Pacific War, and see that submarine.
Yeah. The story of these submariners, it was suicidal to get in these things. And having written what happened at Darwin, just the slightest, if you hit anything, especially if a boat hits you, that sub is done. And you are
Yes.
most likely not surviving the encounter. These are suicide missions when you get into these things. And an
Yes.
interesting little fact, the Japanese, in their infinite non-wisdom of how to perform naval doctrine, they envisioned, similar to how their fleet submarines would operate, only for against warships, because they didn't want to go after commercial vessels. They didn't envision right off the bat that they were going to go into harbors and use these midget subs to hit things. They thought during fleet maneuvers, the midget subs would leave their mother subs and then perform maneuvers against battleships or cruisers or something. I think that is absolutely insanity. That
Yes.
it makes more sense to go with the harbor approach, which is what the British and the Italians end up doing in World War II, mind you. And well, the famous Tirpitz was hit by an X-class midget submarine the British had used. So it has had successful stories.
There are some strange weapons they had. Their Caton, which was their basically their torpedo that somebody rode, and then they had the little the cherry blossom flying bomb, and they
Oh
had some very
yeah,
unique. They had some very unique equipment. That's for sure.
yeah. And at 8:30 a.m., I have it here. The USS Monaghan.
Monahan?
Mahan, sorry, yeah, I was about to mispronounce that one pretty bad there. It was sortying from Pearl Harbor via the North Channel to evade the aerial attacks. And nearby was the destroyer, the USS Zane, which reported seeing a submarine 200 yards astern of the Medusa. The mine layer Breeze spots the submarine next, and then a seaplane tender, the Curtis, opens fire on it and sees and opens fire on it. And by 8:37, it's spotted again, periscope, part of a coning tower is seen, about 1,200 yards to the starboard bow of Monaghan. Monaghan now tries to ram her as the USS Medusa and the tender are still opening fire on it. And apparently, the submarine fires a torpedo at the Curtis and is hit by a 5-inch shell from the tender, which I had notes here saying probably decapitated her skipper, which, wow, it's a hell of a shot.
Yeah.
And the sub was also raked with .5 caliber fire, and the torpedo misses the Curtis and hits a dock. And it tries to fire another torpedo at the destroyer, but it misses as well, and this one explodes against the shores of the Ford Island. She gets rammed and put down to the bed of the harbor about 30 feet deep, and gets 2 depth charges laid against her, blowing her back up to the surface. And I think this is an unconfirmed one, but researchers think this was the HA-15. I'm not so sure myself in this story.
Yeah, I'm not sure that, again, the submarines are very confusing with
Yeah.
their how they figured this all out. Um, there is a pretty good story when they dropped those depth charges. You got to remember that the harbor is very shallow, and
And
when
it
those
could
depth
hit
charges
you,
went
yeah.
off, the concussion coming from the bottom actually lifted the stern of the Monaghan right out of the water because it was that close to them going this. And the unique thing about that submarine also is it was recovered
Mm.
um, fairly quickly after the battle, and it was actually used as landfill when they were repairing a pier there at Pearl Harbor. That's the story. The other story is that they recovered the bodies. That's how they could have found out that maybe that guy was decapitated. The other story is that they just left the bodies in there and buried them with a military funeral. Those are again these little stories that you hear.
Yeah.
Are the bodies in it? Are they not? Was it really used as landfill, pier fill? I
Yeah.
don't know. So
And I don't have too much information on what is the Ha-17. I read that it was depth charged and it sinks in the Keehi Lagoon, just off Pearl Harbor. I'm not sure who actually depth charged it though.
yeah, I don't know. I think that's should be the sub that was found in 1960
Yeah.
and recovered, investigated. The torpedoes were still on board that.
Hmm.
That section of the sub was removed, taken out into deep water and disposed of. Um, that submarine is actually displayed in Japan,
Yeah.
and so they recreated the front bow section again for part of the display. So that's another one that's been recovered.
I have here at 10:40, about 10:40 a.m., the St. Louis reaches the first entrance buoy in the South Channel, and a midget submarine fires 2 torpedoes from around 2,000 yards off her starboard beam. Is this the famous photograph that came up a few years ago of a potential midget submarine firing?
Um, well, the photo that they've been using to say that there was a photo of a sub in the harbor was actually what they were trying to say is that it was actually in the harbor firing a battleship row.
Yeah.
Um, I know they've done some studies, and if you look at that photo, it's right in the middle of the aerial torpedo attack, so you can see all the torpedo tracks running.
Yes.
So if this sub actually surfaced, it surfaced right in the middle of an aerial torpedo attack. How it didn't get hit is amazing. The other thing is I don't know if there's that many witnesses that said they saw a midget sub there by Battleship Row. I'm not really sure about that one, but you'd think that if somebody really there is a midget sub, we'd all know about it. Why is it still a mystery if it's there? If so many people were able to see it, so there's a question with that. But there is a sub that's missing. Four
True.
subs have been found. The fifth one is missing. We don't know what the details are of that, or what became of it, or where it was. So it's again, this is part of that mystery of Pearl Harbor with that. So it's very interesting to think about. Did that sub get there? I don't know. It's a very intriguing story.
Yeah. And at 10:41, the I-16 was patrolling west of Lanai, receives a message, say, success, success, success. This would have been over radio. And researchers think that this may have come from what would have been the Ha-16 from Lieutenant Yokoyama. And there was another, well, they allege there was another radio message at 12:51, which would have been from the same sub, presumably, saying unable to navigate. So obviously the sub is trying to get back to its mother submarine and it's unable to figure it out. The Ha-16 was later found in 1944 with the torpedo tubes empty. Hmm. I'm not sure where this one was found. Was it found within the harbor?
That I have the 19 was, or well, there was one found at Bellows, the other one was the
Yeah,
Monaghan, the third one was found just outside the harbor that
yeah,
did have its torpedo tubes. In 2002, with I think it's NOAA was doing the research. They found the one that the Ward had hit at the beginning
yeah.
of the battle, and that fifth one is the one I think that's missing. But again, it's the subs are not my
Neither
I
me.
have not been my focus, so
Yeah.
I'm not really sure.
And it still remains a mystery. I remember it was a
Yes,
few years ago when they were showing that photo, which, like you said, it probably is not a Midget submarine, mind you. But if that is credible evidence, the same people that were putting up that photo in a news article were reporting that it probably is sunk somewhere in the harbor, and it just has
yes,
been yet to be found. And I mean, there is possibilities when it came to the Darwin attack. It was some amateur divers were outside of the harbor, and they came upon it quite a whiles out in the ocean, and currents just take things to silly places, and you
yes.
never know. But that's basically most of the story for the midget subs, unless you have something to add, maybe about the findings or anything.
No, it just it is a story, another story part of this puzzle that a lot of times doesn't get really looked at. So
No,
it's an intriguing piece. It's a unique piece with this, this cog that of all these moving parts that this was implemented. And again, it's a story of we had a warning, and the warning was going up the chain of command, but yet it wasn't interpreted properly to put people on alert. So
and
again, it's another one of those pieces that was like you missed. So
I think one of my favorite outcomes of this is when it comes to what is, I guess, the second version of this, what happens in the harbor in Sydney Harbor. So I've been saying Darwin this whole, excuse me, Sydney Harbor. When Sydney Harbor has the midget submarine attack, um, there is multiple sightings. There is multiple reports that are done with lights, and they're all disregarded. They go up the chain of command. The chain of command, mind you, was actually very intoxicated. There was a party going on at the time, but having already learnt of this occurrence that happened at Pearl Harbor, because the Allies would have shared information that midget submarines are, in fact, a thing, and this is something the Japanese have acquired. It just shocks me that in Sydney they didn't think that this would be the possibility, especially given they were preparing for such an attack. They had a lot of submarine boom nets put up. But yeah,
yeah, it is amazing.
yeah. Uh, Maybe perhaps just for the audience members to hear one more time, if you could just shout out your YouTube channel just to let them know what they could find there, why they should go see your stuff.
Well, it's SFR Productions, and you can find it. It's the top of the page. There are a couple SFR Productions apparently on YouTube, but mine you'll see the Pearl Harbor Memorial, the Arizona Memorial on the top. A new thing that I'm actually doing is, like I said, I travel a lot. I've started a new series on my page called History Adventures, and the concept with History Adventures is people always have their phones and they're looking at their phones. And while you're sitting waiting for the doctor or something, what do? You scroll on your phone. So, History Adventures, I'm taking people on trips around the world to different military bases, different military battlefields. And I make them into little 10-minute or less little snippets, a little bit of history, and then what you see today. So, the newest thing that we're doing on our page is History Adventures, where we take you around. But you'll also, when you go to my page, my YouTube page, you're going to find lots of Pearl Harbor stuff. You're going to find a lot of stuff on Tarawa. I'm very excited about Tarawa because next year, for November 2023, That is the 80th anniversary of the Battle of Tarawa in November, and I will be going there for 3 days to film, to tour around, and do a bunch of stuff. So you'll find a bunch of films on Tarawa. You're going to find some Civil War stuff that I put together. That's from productions that I did long ago. Um, Also, if you go to my Facebook SFR page on my Facebook page, you're going to find tons of photo albums where I just share thousands of photographs. I have an album on Iwo Jima that's 800 plus photos. I have Tarawa photos. There's probably 500 photos there. I have Peleliu photos, Guadalcanal photos, Pearl Harbor, you name it. So, and I love sharing history with people. So, again, my YouTube page is SFR Productions, and my Facebook page is SFR Productions also, where you can go and get photos. So, I enjoy doing that. I enjoy history. It's a passion of mine.
All right, so please check out his channel. And thank you again for coming here, and thank you again for sharing the story and this photographic stuff that you found. It's such an incredible story that I just love that even to this day we still find things in history that have been not uncovered yet. That's what makes it so exciting.
And thank you for having me. It was a great honor being on the show tonight. Thank you.
This has been the Pacific War Channel, over and out.